And here she is.
Well, welcome. Super
Thank
excited
you.
to see you here. Please correct me right off the bat if I messed anything up, if I missed some of the locations where you traveled to and covered, and anything else you'd like to mention about yourself before we jump into the questions.
No, yeah, you covered it just fine. Thank you. I appreciate the little personal details you added.
Okay, well, welcome. So the first question I think is an obvious one. I'm not sure what your university education was in, but how did you become interested in journalism and specifically focusing on independent journalism? Because it's sort of the, proverbial road less traveled. It's something that to me seems much more difficult to handle, not just from the political standpoint of perhaps challenging narratives, but traveling to places that could be dangerous if they're a conflict zone. So what was your initial interest in this field?
I mean, it might seem to people who haven't heard me talk about this before, it might seem counterintuitive that I was not at all political. I wasn't interested in anything to do with the news or politics. I came from a musical background. My parents were classical musicians. I was a classical pianist to some degree. I mean, university, and I never paid attention to news, politics, or much of anything. I mean, I was not an unempathetic person. I just wasn't interested. I mean, I came from the Canadian education system, which I know you're aware of. That was extremely boring. So I leaned into my artistic side, which is more music and languages. And I after high school, I didn't know what to do with myself. So I went on to study classical piano, which I already played. I did an exchange in my third year and to France, and so I had a lot of opportunity to travel in Europe. And I actually had done a lot of independent travel before and then throughout university. So I think that was very important in kind of how I came to the path that I came to. But anyway, when I finished university, I was like most North Americans or most Westerners in debt. Um, I wasn't as in debt as many, but I still was in debt. So I got a job teaching English in South Korea. Now, I thought I was being unique in going to South Korea because everybody I knew was going to Japan or China, but it turned out there was a lot of Canadians in South Korea. I enjoyed it there. I taught there for 2 years. I paid off my university debts. In between the first and second year, I traveled for 8 months in Southeast Asia, simple third class, second class bus travel, hitchhiking. I had some really interesting experiences. And in fact, I did a lot of really interesting, simple travel before I got political. But I think that was a part of me becoming political because traveling in Southeast Asia, you see the effects of imperialistic wars and policies on that region. But I didn't know any of that at the time. I was just kind of maybe subliminally absorbing it. And then in my second year in living in South Korea, I guess after all the travel in Southeast Asia, when I came back to South Korea, I suddenly wanted to listen to news. It was never a thing for me. And I had internet in my apartment, and so I'd never had that before either. So the combination of the two, I started listening to news, and at that time, this was 2003 or four, I don't remember exactly, maybe 2005, 2004, 5, and Palestine was being talked about a lot. So every day I would listen to this particular channel, which I'm not going to name because they're crap, but at the time they were my introduction to things. And so I just really started feeling concerned, like, why didn't I know any of this before? And how is this possible? This is going, I was so naive. How is this possible? This is going on. The things I was listening to, hearing about, sorry. And I just kind of became not fascinated and not obsessed, but I wanted to learn more. And then at some point, I'm still teaching in South Korea. I'm doing Taekwondo. I'm living my life. But at some point, I decided, okay, I have to go there at some point and see for myself. That didn't happen until 2007, and I did go to the West Bank. Then I spent 8 months there, and I do have a blog post from that time. I didn't use my real name because I didn't think it was important to use my name. I thought the issue was important. But in the space of the 8 months there, and I was there as an activist, I saw quite a lot of oppressive policies, to put it mildly, but I'm trying to, not get anyone censored on YouTube. So, but I saw a lot. I mean, I wasn't just sitting in an apartment or a hotel. I was throughout the region and seeing all the oppressive policies you can imagine when it comes to that particular topic. And by the time I was deported from there, I was very, I'd seen so much, it was impossible to go back to just normal life. And so I became very involved in matters Palestine. The next year I went to Egypt. I spent a lot of time trying to get to Gaza, but I could not. Eventually I went back to Canada, and then I flew to Cyprus and joined a boat movement, and we sailed to Gaza. I was on the third boat that sailed there. We actually made it there, surprisingly. So that was November 2008. And then for the next, year and a half, I was there. I left in mid 2010, and then I went back the next year, and I spent another year and a half. And so during that time, I was there during 2 wars on Gaza. I saw things I never would have imagined I would see in terms of death and related. And at the same time, I was in a very dangerous place. The people were incredibly loving and kind and welcoming and hospitable, but what we were dealing with was extremely dangerous, from every possible venue: air, sea, tanks, drones. It was all there. And we didn't have body armor, but very quickly you adapt to it. And that might sound strange, but I think you have a background in psychology, and you could probably explain why that is, that you adapt quickly to those circumstances. So it became, unfortunately, kind of normal to be living in a place where at any moment you could be bombed or shot, but such was the reality. And I morphed from activism to writing. So I had been publishing. My first blog had opt2007.wordpress.com. Then I opened a blog when I went to Gaza, in Gaza.wordpress.com. And I was just trying to publish what I was seeing. I opened Facebook, and I wasn't interested in it, but I opened it for the sake of sharing there. And because there weren't that many foreigners, there was maybe 5 or 6 or 7 foreign activists there. There was a desire to hear, from, I always like to put Palestinian voices first and foremost if we're talking about that region, but there was a desire for English speaking writing and interviews and so on. So I started writing for various publications. A lot of them were for free. Interpress Services actually paid me. And at some point I started writing for RT. In any case, I'll try to shorten my answer, but basically I saw a lot in 2007 in the West Bank, and then in the 3 years that I lived in Gaza. And then during that time, the war on Syria began in 2011. And I had no idea about Syria, just like I had no idea about much of the world. But I started looking at news that I trusted, and the narrative, or rather the information they were putting out, was in contrast to the NATO narrative on Syria, which was essentially the president of that nation was an evil dictator who needed to be overthrown. That's the NATO narrative, as you know. But I was seeing, and I consulted people that I trusted from the region. And so I quickly understood in 2011 that wasn't the truth. In 2014, I finally went to Syria for my first time and kept going there over the years. And, it was a very similar to what I was seeing in Palestine, but in a different manner, because in Syria, as you know, the West harnessed terrorist proxies, sent them in there to so-called have a revolution. But what they were really doing was shelling and sniping civilians, whether in Damascus or Aleppo or in various cities and villages. And at that time, it wasn't popular to be saying or writing the things that I and later my colleagues were saying and writing, but it was the truth. And again, once you've spent time with people in those circumstances, if you don't tell the truth, there's something really wrong with you. And it became a challenge at first. As of late 2016, the corporate media descended on myself and my colleagues and lambasted us And at first it was hard to deal with, but then you got used to it. And so eventually it got to the point where it doesn't matter. Like they're going to copy paste from the Wikipedia entry, which you did not read from. Thank you. And it's all about trying to censor you from speaking about what you've actually seen and know to be true. So, you know, that's basically how it started, with a very one specific issue, and then realizing it's all interconnected, whether in Venezuela or in Syria or in Donbass, and the things that what's happening between Ukraine and Russia at this moment, it's all interconnected. And unfortunately, I've seen, for example, with Syria, people who are supportive of Palestine fell for the narratives on Syria. So that became a very divisive point. But with time, some people realized, okay, they were misled by Western corporate media and all these fake human rights groups that feign concern. So while I was reporting from Syria, again, from 2014 on, spending a lot of time there over the course of those years, I was aware of what was happening in Donbass, but I wasn't that well informed, I have to admit. I was aware of the basics about, the events in 2014 in Kiev and Odessa, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't have the chance to go to the Donbass till 2019. I spent a few weeks in the DPR, the Donetsk People's Republic. Didn't speak a word of Russian, so obviously I'm dependent on assistance in that regard. But I was able to visit areas and I do think it's important to mention this because this is prior to February 2022. This is September 2019. So I went to Gorlivka and Zaitsevo and areas around there, Yasinovataya, and just talked to the civilians that were living there and heard about what they were suffering under Ukraine shelling. Wrote about that. I went to Crimea, also a region I knew nothing about. In fact, in 2014, when Crimeans held their referendum, I was oblivious to it because I was in Syria. I was tunnel vision. So I wasn't, in fact, I would say for most of the issues that I've come to write or address or speak about, I was honestly ignorant and oblivious to them. So I guess I can say that in that regard, I was like a white piece of paper in that I didn't have any previous biases. Maybe I had some, I don't know, but not the ones that came from Western corporate media and fake human rights groups and, fake empathetic words from Western corrupt politicians. So when I went to Crimea in 2019, I had a good idea by that point what I would hear, and certainly it is what I heard. People were very happy that Crimea returned to Russia, as they told me. They didn't say join; they said return. They said we've always been a part of Russia, and they spoke about all the massive developments in the country, in the peninsula since rejoining Russia. All the infrastructure developments, economic developments. So. And then Venezuela, it was, I was back in Canada at the time. This is before I had moved to Russia. So March 2019, I'd actually been in Venezuela in 2010, but just for personal reasons. In March 2019, the US was orchestrating or trying to orchestrate chaos in that country by attacking the power grid, hoping the country would descend into chaos. So I went there. I joined the US Peace Council for 4 or 5 days, and then I stayed on for another couple of weeks or so. And a similar thing, what the West was saying was absolutely not true. And in fact, the funniest thing was not only that Venezuelans were completely dispelling their narratives just by being calm and helping one another, but that when the West was trying to push Juan Guaido on Venezuelans, there might have been one big protest. I didn't see it. I went to the massive Maduro protest. But then the next week after that massive Maduro protest, I went around on a motorcycle taxi trying to find the Guaido protest. And I found like a handful in Altamira, and I forget all the place names now, but I literally found none in areas where it should have been an opposition strong region. I found a bunch of Chavistas or pro-Maduros marching from there to join the big march that was taking place. So it was pretty amusing in that regard because the reality on the ground didn't match what the media were saying. So that's basically the commonalities that everywhere I've gone, yeah, you'll find people that are anti-Assad, anti-Putin, anti-Maduro, etc. But by and large, it hasn't been like the overwhelming majority.
Well, thank you for
May
this
I
explanation. Yes, go ahead.
may I jump in here?
Mhm.
This was a fantastic introduction, by the way, and which basically englobed everything that well, at least in my channel, we discuss like every day. All the connectivities between Juan Guaido and whatever happens in Ukraine and Syria and you name it, you're gonna see the fingerprints of the three letter agencies and or the powers that be at the moment. Um, I just wanted to more talk to Brazilian people right now, which are going to watch this later. And you said something that is very important for people to understand, that you have a music background. You were not interested in geopolitics or politics whatsoever until a certain point. And I see here two different, well, three, of course, but two different backgrounds. Which is me, that I'm from Rio de Janeiro, and I was very used to the violence and the intervention that we kind of do not understand that that's intervention, but it is through the drug cartels and all that. And you come from a country that, well, I live in Italy now, so I can kind of make a parallel with the reality of Europe. And the reality of Europe is probably more or less the same as the reality in Canada when it comes to quality of life and all that. So this is one person that at some point just got tired of the violence and everything, and say, hey, I have to take care of my life. I'm probably going to have a children at some point, and I want a better situation, a better living situation. And you come from the better living situation, and at some point you got reality basically punching your face, and you're looking around and say, I cannot stand silent anymore. And my case was a little later, when the same thing that they were doing to Brazil came knocking in my door. So I said, I'm living in Italy, so the problems in Europe now are knocking in my door, and that was the moment I said, I cannot stay silent. And I have to say something, because Brazilian people will not understand whatever is going on, and they need to, and people have to.